Welcome to the ClearPath ePortal Developer 4.1 Capabilities demonstration. This video is part of a series of videos which explain the steps to develop different types of data sources and presentation projects in ePortal Developer for modernizing ClearPath applications. In this demonstration, we will show you how to create a web service presentation project for a T27 terminal application which uses transaction server comms. To create a web service presentation project, we should have created a data source project. In this demonstration, we will use an MCP T27 Data Source project created for an eBank sample application. Let's get started. We have already loaded the MCP T27 Data Source project in the Visual Studio IDE. We will add a new Visual Studio project by selecting menu option File, Add, New Project. We will now see the Visual Studio New Project dialog box. Let's select the Web Services project type under the ClearPath presentation node. We are creating an ASP.NET based WCF web service application. So select the project template WCF ASP.NET Compatibility Service Application. Let's name our web service project as eBank Service. Leave the location to the default value and click OK. We will now see the Presentation Generation Options dialog box. This dialog provides the web service generation options. For example, we can provide a different name to the web service than the default service. Similarly, we can specify a prefix to be used in the web method names. Please note that when we create a web service presentation project, each client message in the data source project will result in a corresponding web method with the same name as the client message. This prefix will be used along with the client message name. Note that since this application requires us to log in, this application requires a session. This means that we need to explicitly call the Web Service Connect method to establish a session before we can call a particular web service method to perform a banking operation. Requiring a session is the default for an MCP application. Setting the option Include Connect method to true will generate a Connect web method automatically. In this demonstration, we will accept the default settings and click OK. Now let's build the solution by selecting menu option Build, Build Solution. We can test this web service presentation application in Visual Studio IDE. Right-click the eBank Service project in Solution Explorer window and select Set as Startup Project. Then select the menu option Debug, Start Debugging to run the WCF Test Client. The WCF Test Client window will be opened. WCF Test Client is a GUI tool that enables to invoke a web method and display the response. Tree View in the left pane displays the list of web methods available in the web service. When we double-click a web method, say Send Transfer Funds, on the right pane a window having request and response sections will be displayed. In Request section, we enter the web method parameters and then click on the Invoke button to invoke the web method. In the Response section, we get the output of the web method. Before we test a web method, right-click on Config File node in the Tree View and select Edit with SVC Config Editor. Service Configuration Editor window will be opened. The WCF Service Configuration Editor allows administrators and developers to create and modify configuration settings for WCF services using a graphical user interface. Now expand the Bindings folder and select Service Binding in the left pane of the Service Configuration Editor. Since our application requires us to log in and requires a session, we must allow cookies so that the login session information can be saved between calls. So let's set the Allow Cookies option to true. Next, click File, Save to save the settings and close the editor. Click on Yes if a window is prompted to reload WCF Test Client. Now, double-click the Connect web method in the left pane of the WCF Test Client. It will open the Connect tab in the right pane. Click on the Invoke button. It will return the response in the Response section. Double-click the Send Logon web method in the left pane of the WCF Test Client. It will open Send Logon tab in the right pane. We need to enter a valid user code and password value in the Login web method. In our case, it is webdev. Then, click the Invoke button. Now, let's first test the web method to get the account balances. Remember that setting Require Last Reply as Next Request in T27 Data Source project is set to True by default. This means that the last message sent to the client is the next message received from the client. This mimics web page from submission, and the web service methods must be called in the correct order to get the account balances. When the web method sendLogon is invoked, it returns Perform Action screen in response. So the next message client should send is the Perform Action message. Let's double-click the Send Perform Action web method in the left pane of the WCF Test Client. It will open Send Perform Action window in the right pane. Enter the field Input Field 0 value as Perform Action and choice as 1. Then click on the Invoke button. Accounts messages received in response and account details are displayed in the response section. Now the next message the client should send is the accounts message. Double-click the Send Accounts web method in the left pane. It will open Send Accounts window in the right pane. Enter the field Input Field 0 value as accounts. Leave the field Input Field 1 value as null and click on the Invoke button. Perform Action message is received in response, and now the client can send Perform Action message with a different choice value to do other eBank operations. Now let's perform the fund transfer operation. Double-click the Send Perform Action web method in the left pane of the WCF Test Client. Enter the field Input Field 0 value as Perform Action and choice as 2. Then click on the Invoke button. Transfer Funds message is received in response. Now we can invoke the Send Transfer Funds web method. Double-click the Send Transfer Funds web method in the left pane of the WCF Test Client. It will open Send Transfer Funds window in the right pane. Let's enter the fund transfer details. Input Field 0 as Transfer Funds, From as 1, which is Interest Checking Account ID, To as 2, which is Money Market Account ID, and Amount as 2,000. We will leave the optional fields null. Then click on the Invoke button to do the fund transfer. A confirmation message is received in response, and the confirmation information is displayed in the response section. Next, we need to invoke the Send Confirmation web method to send the confirmation message to the server and receive Perform Action to do further eBank operations. Double-click the Send Confirmation web method. Enter the field Input Field 0 value as confirmation. Leave the field Input Field 1 value as null and click on the Invoke button. In response, we will get the Perform Action screen. We can refine this web service presentation project so that some of the unneeded fields in the server messages, which were generated automatically when capturing the T27 terminal screens, are not displayed. Whenever we invoke a web method, we must enter the correct value for Input Field 0. For example, when we invoke Send Accounts web method, we always want to set Input Field 0 as Accounts. The correct value for Input Field 0 is already initialized in the client and server messages, and we can hide this field. Let's stop debugging by closing the WCF Test Client window so that we can hide the unneeded fields. Also make sure that all the ASP.NET Development Server instances started by the Visual Studio to host the web application for testing are stopped by stopping them manually in the system tray. Double-click Perform Action Server message. Select the Input Field 0 field. In its Properties window, change the visible property to False. Let's save the changes. Please note that when we save the changes in a server message, the corresponding client message will be automatically updated. Build the project by choosing Build Solution. Then, select the menu option Debug, Start Debugging to run the WCF Test Client again. In WCF Test Client window, double-click the Send Perform Action web method in the left pane of the WCF Test Client. Notice that Input Field 0 is not visible now. Only the Choice field is visible, where we can enter value and invoke the web method. Similarly, we can see for other web methods that the unneeded fields which were made invisible are not displayed now. We have seen in this demonstration that to do an eBank operation, we need to invoke more than one web method in particular order, which is not convenient for a web method caller who wants to do an eBank operation. We can solve this problem by creating new client messages and using orchestration to perform the multiple calls to the server program automatically for each new web service method. This approach is demonstrated in MCP T27 Message Orchestration video. Unisys offers a comprehensive set of ClearPath services to enrich the value of your ClearPath applications, data and systems. Please contact your Unisys representative for more information.